Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as our program is about to begin. The bars are now closed. However, the waitstaff will visit your tables. Once again, please take your seats as our program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2022 Stream Realty Partners State of the Market. Please welcome to the stage Executive Managing Director and Partner, Carolyn Shaw.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Stream, I want to welcome everyone to Dallas for the Central State of the Market. And I think I speak for everyone when I say it is great to be in person. It has been a wild and disruptive 2 years. And as we have all seen in the video, here at Stream, we've been extremely busy. We have continued to invest in our technology, but most importantly, our people. We have added 347 new professionals. We've expanded into 3 new markets, Nashville, Phoenix, and Northern Virginia. We've started 3 new service lines, Industrial Development Services, Industrial Capital Markets, and National Program Management. Over Stream's 25 years, we have never allowed for complacency, evolving the company to better serve and deepen our client relationships. This afternoon, we have a great lineup of top professionals who will share insights on the office sector and, of course, the diamond of the season, the industrial sector. After the market updates, you will get to hear from one of the greatest innovators and disruptors of our time, Steve Wozniak. But before we jump in, I want to give a sincere thank you to our sponsors. Our platinum sponsor, Munch Hart, our diamond sponsor, Texas Capital Bank, our gold sponsors, the Conlon Company, Locked-In Companies, Cleanscapes, PGS, Invoke, OmniPlan, CoStar, and Republic Title, and our silver sponsor, Realty Ads. Again, thank you to our sponsors for supporting tonight. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Enjoy the program. You grabbing it?
Our first panel focuses on the evolving state of the office and potential opportunities and challenges we face in the current market. To lead this panel, please welcome Managing Director and Partner, Ramsey March.
Hi, everybody. If we could just have the panelists join me on stage, and I'll introduce you all. So we'll be brief here, get through our introductions, and then get started talking about the state of the office market. First to my left, Rachel Coulter with Agency Leasing in our office, Austin office. Rachel, thank you for being here. Matt Weiser in Dallas, Executive Vice President in our agency leasing team. Randy Cooper to his left, Vice Chairman in our tenant representation practice. Jack McKinney to the left of Randy in our Chicago office, Managing Director, Agency Leasing. And then Connor Greising at the end is joining us from Austin as well, Tenant Representation, Managing Director and Partner. So we're gonna get started first, just right out of the gate, talking about the last 2 years have been, 2020 and 2021 have been two of the more challenging years we've ever experienced in the office market.
Really?
Really. But I want to talk about green shoots. So where are we seeing in the respective markets that are represented here, both from an office and a landlord and a tenant perspective? Where are we seeing some green shoots in the market? Matt, let's start with you.
Okay. Thank you, Ramsey. So, it's been definitely a very tough couple of years. Speaking on behalf of Dallas, things are certainly starting to pick up for us. We've really seen it's not a surprise, it's not a new trend, but it's really been a flight to quality. It's been Class A office space. If you look back in Dallas over the last 6 or 7 years, really all of our absorption, our positive absorption has been in that Class A sector, followed by, comparatively the Class B sector being all negative. So again, this flight to quality trend has only been accelerated during, or post-pandemic, if you will. As companies are trying to lure their people back to the office, they've really got to consider what they do to that environment to make it dynamic, make it interesting, make it a place where they want to work, they want to socialize, they have a place to go get a cup of coffee with their colleagues and friends, go have a drink after work. And so again, all of these things are not new, but it's creating a true separation between new and like new projects. And so, like an example of that would be, you've got a building here in Dallas that was built 10 years ago. Back in 2017 or 18, it would have been kind of a tier 1 Class A asset. It might be viewed as a tier 2 kind of Class A asset now. Even though it has a best location, it's in the right submarket, it's still 10 years old. So I think my friends up here are probably experiencing the same in those markets, but what that means, I think, for all of us in this room is obviously if you're a developer and you're building new office space, you have an opportunity to, really think ahead, not just do the check the box fitness center or check the box tenant lounge, but really look at how you can create something very unique, very kind of, I guess, over the top, because that's really what they're starting to look for. And if you're an existing building owner, right, there's still a hope for a lot of us and people in the room, because Dallas specifically, we've got 200 plus million square feet, and a lot of that is older real estate. But you look at projects like a Trammell Crow Center, which we were afforded the opportunity to be a part of that transition, and when you see transformational changes go into a really good piece of real estate in a great location, you will see what you need to see, which is rent growth, net absorption, and so forth. So best in class, well-located real estate, flight to quality.
So I'd be interested to hear from Rachel and Austin on this, because you're wondering what a green shoot is. You're thinking about trees in Austin. You guys are way past green shoots.
Yes, everything in Austin has actually, we're coming out of COVID in a strong sense. Definitely the flight to quality still applies in Austin. The dynamics in the suburbs versus downtown, or for instance in the Domain in Austin can vary in terms of when it comes to quality and when it comes to amenities. And I think that this whole conversation ties together. It's companies are really trying to lure their employees back to the office. And how are they going to be differentiating themselves from their competition from an office standpoint? So amenities that landlords have to consider, and again, not just checking the box. Outdoor space is important, conference facility, the gyms. I mean, I know in some other markets, even landlords are putting in, wine cellars and basketball courts on top of buildings, and all kinds of things that are maybe are wild and crazy. But if it gets you tenants and gets you occupancy, and these days you can pass things through on these new builds, which we can go down a whole elaborate conversation when it comes to add-on factors and operating expenses and how that is less important to the tenants in terms of the add-on factors than actually having the amenities there. So there's a really big push for that in Austin, and of course all the new developments are doing great and have top-class amenities, but even the B buildings, adding those and being very thoughtful about it has been important as well.
Jack, Midwest perspective from you.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, quite a bit different than Austin, I'd have to say. But, in fact, when we had a little pre-call a couple weeks ago, and I worried that I was sounding a bit smug when I said that in Chicago, the amenities arms race has escalated to the point of DEFCON 5. For the last 10 years, we've been installing these newfangled amenities, and, the arms race continues to escalate, especially in terms of what Class B buildings need to do to stay relevant. So I kind of felt bad. I felt like I was sounding condescending to my teammates here, saying like, well, listen, that's great to hear that you guys are building fitness centers. Now we've got these basketball courts on top of buildings. And, it gets, as you can imagine, pretty stratified when you talk about certain submarkets outperforming others. Fulton Market, which you see our building, actually Stream's building, in the heart of that neighborhood, has been a great performer in Chicago now for the last 8 years, since Google decided to pioneer really the neighborhood from an office leasing standpoint, and it's predominantly Class A properties. I think we're going to talk about this as well a little bit later in the discussion in terms of product marketing. How does Class B space stay in the game? How does it overcome some of these challenges? Where do we go from here, especially in a market like Chicago? And I know that topic maybe doesn't apply to Austin or some of these other Sunbelt markets that are growing much more quickly, but it's an issue for us. And I think what we have coined in our market, maybe we didn't coin it there, but the term commute worthy. I hear all these things about, some of the things that Matt and Rachel have said about how do we get people back to the office. And I think of, if it's a gloomy Sunday in February in Chicago, what's making somebody want to get excited about coming to the office the next morning to catch that 6 o'clock train? And I don't know anymore whether for a lot of our product, unfortunately, the fact that there's a free fitness center and a lounge is going to do it. So I think that's certainly part of the evolving conversation that we need to have.
Before we move on to another discussion, one soundbite that's probably a takeaway value for our market in DFW. We look back the past 12 months, and across our entire market, we had about 3 million square feet of negative net absorption, unfortunately. However, that's over 200 million square feet, but when you drill down in terms of just the vintage, ignoring whether that building's been really updated or amenitized in a post-COVID world, the net absorption for those buildings was positive 1.1 million square feet. So it's a very simple metric, but it tells us what we're seeing in real terms on the ground in the data. So it's a real thing, and I think you could run that across any market. I want to pivot for a moment to something that's a little bit less fun than talking about amenities and talk about shadow space. So we have large corporate users in all of the markets represented in the central region who either aren't occupying all their space currently or utilizing it, or they're not sure how they're going to utilize it going forward. So curious, first from our team on the tenant rep side, how are you getting creative or being strategic with your clients on how they basically untap the value or tap the value of their shadow space?
Yeah, so, first of all, a distinction between shadow space and sublease space. Sublease space typically leased and advertised as available versus shadow space, which could be leased or owned and is not necessarily advertised as available. So some of the best ways to explain what shadow space is and its impact, certainly in a market like DFW where we have a lot of corporate headquarters, think, while I describe this, corporate campuses. not necessarily just lease space in a building, but a corporate campus. Companies went out pre-COVID, they leased or built space to accommodate their needs. And then in a post-COVID world, they came back and realized they don't need all the space that they have. They either can't keep their employees or they don't need their employees. So they have all this leftover space. And this space creates a fantastic value for a tenant, but there's a lot of twists and turns to it. One is because it's not, the reason that I made a big point about not advertised is these companies are trying to get their employees back to the office. And the last thing that they want is to have their employees know that they're marketing their space for lease. But they're also have another challenge in when you think about a corporate campus, they're typically very well maintained, almost no expense bared whatsoever as it relates to furniture and amenities, company cafeterias, great security, terrific grounds, but they're sitting there empty. So what that really means to the employer is it feels weird when their employees come back to work because think of them as kind of half empty. Their company cafeteria doesn't have enough scale to be open, and so they really need someone else to help energize the campus and make it feel like a place that people want to come back to work. They don't want to come back to a ghost town. They want to come back to some place that's fun and vibrant. So these companies, if you can get through all the mystique and secrecy, a lot of times there's a great opportunity to be unlocked for a tenant because these spaces are typically, once again, no expense spared. They have great amenities inside the campus. They're really overserved. They might have, again, think of a campus, security guards driving around in golf carts. Think about big company cafeterias that have been shuttered during COVID, trying to bring their employees back. They need more headcount there. So those spaces are generally ready to go. They've got desks and monitors and chairs and trash cans. I mean, they are just absolutely ready to go. And so the other big thing about shadow space, you're dealing with a corporation that is really not as focused on the recovery that they get. They're looking for ancillary items like the headcount that I was talking about to help reactivate their campus and get people back to work. A great example of what I'm talking about is our team represented Fannie Mae on a build-to-suit up at Granite Park here up in Plano. And they built the space, they moved in, everything was great. COVID hit, we called them and they said, wow, we have microphones in our office because we're really talking about what we're gonna do with all this space. Well, that led to a two-floor sublease with Fannie Mae. They said that was all that that was all that they would put out on the market. Subsequent to that, they postponed. Y'all might remember the variants and some of the other things that all impacted us. And then made another call, and sure enough, put another 2 floors. That led to another 2-floor tenant that we represented. So now Fannie Mae's got about half of their building subleased to other tenants. The amenities have been reactivated. Cafeteria is opening back up, and they're back in business.
Randy, how long-term were those subleases?
Excuse me?
How long-term?
So yeah, the first lease that we did for the term of the Fannie Mae lease, which had 13 and a half years left on it. The next one is shorter term, 5 years with options. And then currently in the market right now, again, shadow space is funny. You know, depending on who you are, when you call, and who you talk to, you might get a flat out no. Other folks, if you get the right people in the organization, they'll very cautiously entertain you. We're representing a company right now that's looking at some opportunities out in the suburbs, and we've uncovered 2 shadow space opportunities, neither that are on the market right now. But in the event that that transaction winds up in one of those 2 opportunities, it's going to be a home run for our tenant and a home run for the corporation that's offering that space.
Connor, are you seeing the same dynamic in Austin or different?
I was just going to say, for the tenants we work with, we wish there was more shadow space, but Austin, candidly, is just such a supply-constrained market that those opportunities are few and far between. To Rachel's point, there was a pandemic, there was a slowdown. We had sublease space that increased roughly 600% from Jan 2020 to April 2020. That really got filled up quite quickly as we got into the first 2 quarters of 2021. And we're hitting a point now in Austin where we're about to be sub 5% vacancy again in the CBD and our other core submarkets. So I wish there were more opportunities for the tenants we work with, but there aren't many.
Yeah, your market is blind alley central, because we work with Connor on transactions in Austin, and we'll go on a tour and then follow up the next week, and it'll have 2 letters of intent on it. It's crazy.
I felt like I was being really harsh about Chicago. I was feeling bad about my answer before until I heard that. I'm like, well, okay. 19%, I guess, isn't looking too good. Anyway, sorry, Ramsey.
Sure. Well, curious on Chicago, sublease space.
Well, there was, we were approaching 4 million square feet of sublease space toward the end of 2020, and now that number's cut in half. So we're getting back down close to the levels of, I would call it equilibrium, for sublease vacancy in Chicago. One important thing to point out, and I know we have limited time, so for an audience that I presume might not be as well-versed in Chicago office leasing, the market carries, or has historically carried, about roughly 10 to 12% static vacancy. So for us, the real halcyon days are when we get to like 13, 14% vacancy. It's just the truth. And because as the old joke goes, you can build to Iowa, there's always a penchant and an appetite for new development. And and that's in large part why we've seen Fulton Market, which, by the way, has been, talk about green shoots, it was the hottest, I meant to mention this earlier, the hottest submarket in the country in 2021 from an office leasing velocity standpoint. So there's a story to be told there, but there's definitely a changing of the guard going on, between the Central Loop. It's this dichotomous situation, what we call the West Loop, Central Loop, and East Loop. West Loop along Wacker Drive, which is kind of our Park Avenue, west across the expressway to Fulton Market, has been very healthy and has attracted, collectively over the last 8 years, close to 7 million square feet of suburban in-migration, and we still remain a very attractive headquarters location for corporate, or for Fortune 1000 companies. So I think we have 40 of them. So the thing is that people just have to understand some of the nuances when it comes to the vacancy that we carry, and there's frankly some vacancy in 100-year-old buildings that very likely will be converted into some other use in the near future, and we'll continue to see some of that attrition of supply.
So on the sublease topic, because we get asked a lot, as Dallas sublease space has gone from 4.5 million feet, you read about it, it's 8 million feet, it's 9 million feet. Since we've got you up here and you up here, Connor, when I get asked the question about does it really compete with direct office space, the answer from my perspective is always very, very few projects, right? So if you've got a big building like the Uber build-to-suit where they came down, took down 500,000 feet, dumped it on the sublease market, absolutely. You take another big brand new project, again, these are all flight to quality, up in Legacy or other markets, yes. But do you guys see it as, when you're representing tenants, that it's a real competitor?
I think, there's some subleases that are just great, like the Liberty Mutual sublease space that was available. It's really lease space that was available up at Legacy Park. That was great. FF&E in place, really easy, plug and play. But when you're aggregating all those millions of square feet, it's generally speaking a lot of little spaces in a lot of different places. And it's very hard for an existing tenant to wind up in a spot that works well for them if they're over a full floor. It seems like sublease space for tenants that are under a full floor, 5,000, 10,000 square feet, you can find something. But for a large tenant, it almost never works, unless it's really big, like that Liberty Mutual space. Connor, you agree?
I would agree. Generally, during COVID, we just had quite a bit of tech-oriented sublease space that came online, and we worked with a group who was moving down from Chicago, and it was kind of a perfect fit. Peak 6 capital management, so trading intensive, and we were very fortunate that GoDaddy was offloading 120,000 square feet of former heavy sales space. So power, desking, like it kind of was very easy, and otherwise would have gone to new construction. But needle in the haystack in Austin.
So another takeaway, a tie back to our initial topic, what kind of sublease space is really moving when it's available? It's the best stuff, right? I mean, it's simple. So moving on, I'd like to move on from sublease space, if you don't mind.
Please.
So let's talk about a tie-in to work from home and/or hybrid workplace. So I think it's here with us for a while at least. Companies are going to be contemplating how much space do I need, and then how am I going to use the space I do have. So I'm curious to hear in your various markets. Connor, we'll start with you from a tenant perspective. How are you seeing tenants adjust right now to work from home and hybrid work?
Yeah, just given how much exposure we have to the tech sector, I feel like this is a very popular conversation we're having with our occupiers. And what we've found is you look at really two different types of companies, and those are companies that are on the offensive versus defensive. In our mind, the offensive companies are very committed to the iterative process. They're the progressives, they're the innovators, and they're banking on the flight to quality, and they're going and making decisions in a period of turmoil and uncertainty. And then we have the defensive companies, and they're companies that are slow moving. They're potentially remote first. It's a bit more the worker and the labor in that space is more rote and memory driven and process driven. And we've seen them on the sidelines. I think that's call centers, heavy sales, back office. We haven't not seen them make the commitment. But for those offensive companies, what we've seen them focus is on 4 C's: convenience, concentration, collaboration, community. So the spaces that they're focused on are again, there's a flight to quality, but I just think individually, starting with the first one, with concentration, I've had 0 to 5% of my best ideas or best work has ever been done just sitting at my desk looking at 2 monitors. It's on my way to a coffee shop. It's at our 10th floor Sky Lounge when I know no one else is there. Convenience, when you're thinking about the Gen Z or millennial that you're trying to attract to your project and attract back into the office and engage in some of this FOMO, and the new FOMO is fear of missing the office. You're trying to engage them and thinking about where can I stop at Whole Foods on my way home? Do I have access to this fitness center that's effectively like an Equinox that I otherwise wouldn't have access to in the apartment building I live in now? Is there a doctor like via an Eden Health on the ground floor? And I think of those are the factors that are not necessarily inside the 4 walls, but when I think about inside the 4 walls of your space, it's largely community and collaboration. And those can be spaces that are assembly spaces. It's kind of redesigning how you think about the workplace, and really like if culture is your software, using your workspace as the hardware. I would say in Austin, we've seen one specific example, a large Australian software company that signed a lease in January of 2020. So they were able to react to everything that was going on in COVID. They signed on for 160,000 square feet. They're just getting ready to move in. Furniture's been ordered. I had an opportunity to walk through it with their broker and their director of real estate. There's 55 desks across 165,000 square feet. It's 55 permanent seats. The rest of it, community space, assembly space, concentration space. But it's really creating an environment that's driving them back in.
I'd say outside of the tech companies, just traditional professional services, law firms and all that, there's the topic that people talk about flex space and one-to-one offices and working from home. But generally speaking, I think it's just the difference in the type of companies. think most people have an eye toward things getting back to normal, but certainly in the next few years, still planning on some type of flexibility for their employees to work from home, work certain amount of days in the office. It's just part of the planning these days.
I was getting prepared for this, reading Gallup ran a poll in 2017 across office white-collar workers, 2 days a week, 60%, or 2 days a month, 60% said they do work outside of a typical office environment. So maybe we've always been doing hybrid, and now it's just we're rebranding it.
Yeah, one last thing. Because of the lack of development during COVID, and then with a rush for a number of people to come back to the office in that smaller segment of the flight to quality that we've been talking about, that has put an incredible demand on decision making. And so many companies are, we have clients that they read the newspaper and they think the office market is just dead and the future is just working from home. And then we have another set of clients that, they don't, it's this kind of flex thing. But the net result is there's very little space available in the markets where most people want to be. And if you don't make decisions, you just lose out. And then they kind of scratch their head and go, how come you didn't tell us? And we were like, we did. I mean, we're not a blue suede shoe salesman. It was kind of light blue. I mean, we told you, but it's really hard to tell a client that they've got to get a signature on a piece of paper, and pressuring them into that, but it's for their own good in a lot of these markets.
Yeah, in Austin, we call that, and when we're talking with the tenant reps and doing deals and trying to, you ask us how many proposals do we have out, and we're honest, I'm like, okay, this is going to be another one of those circumstances where your client just has to lose out on a deal, maybe two, before they're going to think you're not brokering them. So yeah, it's interesting dynamics.
I'd like to pivot to a topic that is kind of boring, but it's very important because it crushes.
Oh, come on.
It crushes more pro formas than probably anything else in the country, and that's parking. So,
Oh, I thought you were going to marketing. I'm sorry.
yeah, well, we're going to go to marketing as well, so we're going to save time for that. But briefly, I wanted to touch on parking because we're seeing a shift, I know, here in Dallas. I think finally we're starting to see municipalities become aware of what a parking minimum can do to really great projects by requiring that. I think that'll go away eventually in Dallas. But what are you seeing in Austin? Chicago's a different animal, but in other markets like Dallas, are we seeing municipalities, and then are we seeing tenants start to accept lower parking ratios, simply put?
Yeah, in Austin, everyone still drives to work. I mean, not everyone, but, and of course, in downtown Austin, there's a fair amount of housing. So a lot of people are able to work downtown and office downtown, which definitely helps. There's been kind of a mentality in Austin for years from the employer saying, we'll just figure it out. Because the density in Austin and the demand definitely outweighs the availability of parking. But what we're seeing now from tenants is flexibility. So we've talked a lot about how the hybrid work environment, employers are trying to get their employees to come back 2, maybe 3 days a week. Well, the ask is, can Sally and Joe share a parking card? So it's really interesting, and I tend to geek out on parking a little bit, but in trying to evolve the conversation and the software and the hardware for these parking garages to accommodate this. Because if you can accommodate it, you're going to be one up from your competition who maybe can't. So, and then the whole float conversation about parking and how to maximize revenue, that has changed because not all of these employees are back in the office at any one time. So the data is being collected, and I think we're going to continue to see a little bit of an evolution in how downtown towers, at least, even suburban office buildings are parked. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for Dallas, it just depends on, are you talking about back office? Are you talking about the density 6 to 7 per thousand, where if you didn't have that kind of parking ratio, you were cut. Well, that's the kind of last demand that we believe will come back right now, which is that truly back office, densely parked, the whole call center environment. We won't even go into that. In terms of our densely populated submarkets like downtown and uptown, it still seemed very, it's very current that the ask is still a 3 per thousand parking ratio for these projects. And downtown, for the most part, has not been able to provide that, nor have some of those, closer projects, infill markets. So, but it's not becoming as big of a hot button. And you just drive the parking garages and you look around, and if the flexible work schedule remains, it shouldn't be a strain on those projects. We ran a survey, I think this was Ramsey a couple years ago, where we got together with a bunch of the folks who own projects in Uptown, and we came together to really try to get a true sense as we were getting prepared to build the quad as to what is the true parking ratio and how many people are there. And I think it wound up being right around 2 per thousand.
It was actually as low as
Was
1.5 per thousand.
1.5 per thousand,
True
right?
utilization on the last generation, newest Class A buildings in Uptown.
So, it's more about the perception of what that is. It's the bid-ask spread that's always been there. But I do feel like that's not becoming as big of a hot button. The bigger hot buttons are now everything that we've talked about, which is the quality, the amenities, the walkability, all the things around the project.
I want to save some time to talk about marketing because we only have a few minutes, but Randy and Connor, from a tenant's perspective, is a tenant that previously would have cut a building because they just don't have the ratio, now leaving that building in the mix, for instance.
Yeah, I think that, it's probably the biggest metric that a building in a scoring process has to go through to not get cut, no matter what happens in reality later. There's a lot of decision makers and real estate facility directors that it is just a must to have a particular ratio, especially when, in the flight to quality and all things we talked about, the more expensive buildings, the only way to mitigate the high rental cost is to increase density. And if you can't provide for the parking for that density and there's no mass transportation or other options available, then, when you start scoring buildings on a cost to house that employee on an annual basis, that parking ratio starts to hurt, at least in the scoring process. In reality, I believe it's different. But look no further than our moderator that was behind, the whole renovation of Trammell Crow Center. You provided parking because you knew how important parking was. And look at, Fountain Place, some of the other buildings in downtown Dallas that are, that have leasing velocity now is simply because of the parking ratio.
We just built a 475,000 foot building in Fulton Market with 34 parking spots. So I think you can see the market to market vagaries just bit. Yeah. And not to say parking isn't important at all, and plenty of people drive to work, but obviously just public transportation is far more extensive, and it's got a longer legacy in Chicago. So.
But even in your market, why 34 was 34?
34 spots.
Why 34 and not 20? Like, it's still a challenge.
That's
to
how many
figure out
we could fit in the one level of parking.
Okay.
Yeah,
There you go.
exactly. So, yeah. And by the way, we've only the building is 85% leased, and we just delivered 6 months ago, and we still have 13 spots left. So,
I do think finally tenants are starting to connect the cost of parking with the cost of their utilization of the space, whereas it used to be, at least in Dallas, just a throwaway. Like, the owner's just going to build this giant parking garage, and it's never going to really show up in the economics. I think it's starting to finally connect the dots. We only have a minute or so, but necessity is the mother of invention, and I think the last 2 years have been challenging. What are you doing or seeing in your markets to Jack's point earlier, to help make your projects stand out, or sublease space that you're leasing stand out from a marketing perspective?
yeah, from a marketing perspective, I look at this question as, I'll have to condense my 10-minute prepared response down to 1 minute and 15 seconds here. But how do we create meaningful product differentiation when there isn't meaningful demand? And now I know that this answer can be extremely nuanced, and as we've already discussed, very market-specific, class-specific, even sub-market specific. However, I am concerned, at least in our market, and I think other people around the country in various markets share this concern about Class B product, some Class B product potentially reaching functional obsolescence, and what we do to pump new life into that product, aside from amenities, but from a marketing standpoint, what can we do? It reminds me of, I worked at a place called Sport Mart, which was a predecessor to Dick's Sporting Goods when I was in high school. And whenever we had sluggish sales in certain products, we moved them to an end cap. And for anybody, I'm sure most people know what an end cap is, but literally the space at the end of the aisle where it wasn't encumbered or crowded in with all that other shelf space, all of the other stuff on the shelf. And so Class B space needs to find an end cap. And I think that the way to do that, and what we're doing in our market now, is to make the space itself more compelling. We're kind of taking a back to basics approach that favors experiential marketing. And as somebody who is a frustrated copywriter, I wanted to be a Don Draper kind of guy, I love marketing. And I see tremendous value, and I'm not just saying this because Trevor Martica is here with Realty Ads, and what Realty Ads is doing in order to help us enhance our marketing efforts, make sure that we have nothing slipping through the cracks, get us to target tenants directly, leveraging social media in ways that we haven't before. However, I do think that it's incumbent upon us as a discipline, as an office leasing discipline, to rethink, reimagine the way that we are creating experiences within our buildings, piggybacking off of largely what Connor said, for the tenants and also for the tour experience. So what we've been doing, and I'm trying to be succinct here, but we've taken the white box and elevated it to the extent that we're trying to create a sensory engagement experience. So we've got music playing, we actually have aromatics scents going, we have, inspired largely by the Van Gogh exhibit in Chicago, a projection mapped full cinematic drone experience in these white box spaces. But really it's this, I think, approach of trying to get people excited about the actual space again. Because frankly, as much as I love marketing and would love to sit through a logo study and come up with taglines, that's like screaming into the abyss right now. You need to make sure that the space is representative of, the building's brand image within the marketplace.
I think that's a great way to close. Unfortunately, I wish we could hear from everybody on this topic because I know you have great thoughts and ideas. Just grab one of our panelists here at the happy hour if you want to hear more about what they're doing in their markets. But thank you all for joining us, and thank you all. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Our next panel will start in 60 seconds. Our next panel will discuss the state of the industrial market, and to lead it, please welcome Executive Managing Director and Partner, Seth Koshak.
Thanks, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started here. I know we're trying to get through this stuff quickly, so let me quickly introduce the panel. Starting to my left here and moving down the row, we've got Matt Dornack, who is Managing Director in our DFW office, Madison Hamilton, who co-leads the Industrial Capital Markets Division and is based in Houston, Sam Owen, Managing Director based in Austin, and Sarah Ozan, Senior Vice President based in DFW. So, to get us going, I think, you know, we've been in this industrial market and really things have been great for a while. It reminds me, if you've driven around Texas long enough, you've probably seen a bumper sticker that says, "I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could." That's what we've been experiencing from Capital for the last 7 or 8 years, 9 years, however long this industrial run has been going on. So it's been a very dynamic and fast-moving market. Maybe we're into a little bit of turbulent waters right now, so it'll be interesting to hear what the panel says here. But I think to get us started, we've spoken to a few of you, and the question and maybe the elephant in the room is, what is a particular large e-commerce user? I won't use their name. Last time I was on a panel, the head of HR called our office 20 minutes after and told me to not use their name, so I won't do that. But what is the impacts? We've all read the news. We've all heard what they're up to and the potential effects of that. So to understand that in each individual market, let's ask Matt and see what he's seeing as it relates to that and the news that we've seen.
Thanks, Seth. Yeah, so I think everyone in this room's probably seen the recent, past really couple weeks, headlines of this one big e-commerce user likely giving space back via sublease. And some reports, if you look, it depends on what you read, but 20 to 30% potentially that they're looking to give back. And I think, you know, when that was announced, there was this negative sentiment in the market. We saw a slight pullback from some large tenants, kind of saying, okay, what do we need to be looking at here on our e-commerce and just what our requirements look like. Bottom line is, it's kind of moved past that already. In just 2 short weeks. And so I don't think it really matters too much, but the answer is no one really knows. So are they going to give back space? Who knows how much? Who knows? What we do know is it's purpose-built, very highly specialized equipment that's in these buildings. They've put in a lot of infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like an average tenant can just move in and operate as efficiently as this e-commerce user can day one. I think another takeaway is if you look back in 2019, half of 2021, our deals in the market list that we track internally was around 35 to 40 million square feet. And this one user had about 3 to 5 million square feet at any given time of deals in the market. Today, that list is 60. And they don't have a single square foot on that entire list. And so I think it just speaks to that demand that we're seeing from these other users, so we don't think it's going to have too big of an impact.
I would just add that at the end of the day, a lot of these users are still trying to catch up to said e-commerce group in all these markets. And so we've had a lot of direct conversations with many of these users over the past few weeks. The narrative as of yesterday with almost across the board was we're still full steam ahead. We're obviously monitoring what's going on in the economy and the markets and interest rates and all those fun things. But we're still very bullish about the industrial market and where that's going to lead with future absorption.
Anybody else? Austin, you seen anything from them?
You know, we haven't seen much of an effect in Austin. We're really not a big box market. So having one tenant that you're relying on is not our game. So I don't think it's going to affect us too much. I mean, right now you don't have 200,000 feet that you can find in Austin, and so it's not a concern. We'd love to see them get back in the market in a big way because we got some space coming. But right now I think the market's super healthy, and we're seeing demand from some larger manufacturers, namely Tesla and Samsung, that are keeping the market very active.
Good. Well, let's move on from Amazon. Well, no, legal team, we're going to need your help.
There you go.
All right.
Almost had it.
All right, so put that behind us. Let's think about what y'all are seeing today versus, maybe 24 months ago. You can go back however long you think, but I think obviously there's just been this tremendous run up. Are things changing? What does supply look like? What does demand look like? Deals in the market, et cetera. Just elaborate on kind of what's the day in and day out of what you're seeing today. Sarah, let's start with you.
So everything is up except for vacancy rates and concessions. And I was thinking about this question. The answer is everything has changed and nothing has changed in the last couple of years. Things continue to be great. Rental rates are up. Vacancy rates are down. Construction costs are way up. So all of that story, I think, has been the story that you probably heard from us in 2019, even when we met here. The thing that I think is actually the most interesting, at least for Dallas, especially thinking about the northern markets of the DFW market, is really what's happened to annual increases. And so when we think about leasing, the sticker shock on the rate has more or less gone away. And frankly, the thing that I've been looking at statistically is just looking at the last 12 months and really the last 24 months of what we've done to annual bumps. A 4% increase pre-COVID, or even in 2020, was almost unheard of in Dallas. And in the first quarter of 2021, about 10 to 15%, depending on the submarket, of the deals that were made saw bumps above 3%. In that first quarter of 2022, that was 43% across all the markets. Across all of the northern markets. We'll let Matt talk about the South. But I think that really speaks to just how quickly some of these trends are spreading. And so when you think about, okay, the world's getting really good, your neighbor does something that's super aggressive, that's great for a landlord, that's great for a deal, and about 10 seconds later, the next guy does it. And it's really, we see rate bumps, we see it in concession declines, we see it in all sorts of different metrics, but really just how aggressive people can get on making deals and successfully making deals, I think is probably what's most been interesting to me.
For Houston, Houston has rent growth, finally.
About time.
Yeah, and many of you might be rolling your eyes at that statement, but it's true, it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. I think the biggest shift in Houston over the last few years has been Houston historically has been what we've called a local distribution market, meaning that the majority of goods and services in these warehouses terminates within the Houston MSA. We're north of 7 million people. When you layer in San Antonio, Austin, and the Valley, it's upwards of 18 to 20 million people within a 5 to 6 hour drive time. Houston's changing from just being a local distribution market, and it's becoming more of a quasi-regional distribution market. And as delivery timelines are continuing to compress, you can no longer serve Houston from Dallas. And so that's leading to much larger tenant requirements. So as an example, in a pre-2019, you might have 5 deals over 200,000 square feet transact a year. In the last 18 months, we've had over 20 leases, not build-to-suits, true leases in spec buildings over 400,000 square feet, which is a really welcome sign, and we think that's going to significantly continue. And then last, vacancy in Houston right now is 5.4%. The historical low, since we've been tracking it dating back to 2006, is 4.5%. We're going to blow way past that, and I think we're going to get sub 4% by the end of the year.
So staying on this topic a little bit more, we've talked a little bit about deals on the market list and whatnot. We've talked about the e-commerce users and how influential they are. It's a deep roster. Who else is on that list? What other users are you seeing? Who's driving that demand? It's open for anybody, so let's start in Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about Austin. Austin, there was COVID, and then there was the Tesla announcement in mid-2020, so it's kind of pre-COVID, pre-Tesla, now post-COVID, post-Tesla. And with the Tesla announcement came a lot of new developers, and it's going to bring a lot of new space. But we've also seen extreme demand from tenants, and we've seen that announcement translate to leasing. Right now, we're tracking about 6 million feet that's under construction today. About half of that is leased. 3 million feet, about 1.2 million of that was leased to Tesla-related groups. So it is a direct correlation. But to compare that, Tesla was a $1.1 billion investment in the Austin plant. Samsung's investing $17 billion. Applied Materials is looking at investing $2 billion. NXP is another semiconductor company looking at investing $2 billion. So it's not just one tenant that's going to drive this, and these are all just announcements. I mean, Tesla's barely been open, and we're seeing real users, real deals, and real absorption because of it.
What about Dallas? Yeah, Dallas, so I'd say, and this goes back to Seth's previous question a little bit, but we're seeing a lot of really big retailers, and then a lot of freezer cooler food production, and I would also say just there's this true reshoring of manufacturing is taking place live. That's something we've seen a lot more large build-to-suits that are looking at purchasing land and building, and so that's something that's certainly new. If you look at what has changed, to go back to your previous question, these deals have gotten significantly larger, and so today we're tracking, I think it's 18 million square foot or 900 or greater million square foot buildings that are under construction in the market. We're also tracking 24 million square foot users in terms of tenants, and so there's a lot of buildings coming, there's a lot of tenants coming, so these deals have gotten way larger in the past, and it's kind of a who's roster of these large retailers that's taking this space.
Yeah, and Houston's really drafted off Dallas. We compare our deals in the market list to Dallas, and Dornack sent me a list 18 months ago, and I was just blown away by the amount of big deals that were actually transacting. And almost to a T, every user that did a big deal in Dallas is now in Houston or currently looking in Houston. So he said they've got 20 plus or minus million square foot deals in the market and a decent amount of million square footers under construction. In Houston, we're tracking 7 million square foot deals, and there are 2 million square foot options on the ground, and those would be the only 2 on the ground over the next 12 months. So if you have one of those, you feel pretty confident. But that was really interesting to us, where we've been drafting off of that. Just going back to my comment that bigger users are starting to really take Houston seriously, because not only can you serve Houston, but you're hitting Austin, San Antonio, and the Valley.
I just want to be Dallas or Houston when I grow up.
Your rates are 3 times ours. I wouldn't cry too hard here.
To elaborate on that, though, we are seeing those same users as well. I mean, it's Target, it's Lowe's, it's Home Depot, it's the HVAC groups, it's all of the same companies. We're just, we don't have the space, but we're getting the same deals. They're pre-leasing buildings, and I would argue that if you went into all those buildings, 12, 24 months after those tenants occupy, every single one of them could use more space, and there is no space in those projects where they are.
All right, Sarah said it a minute ago about construction costs. Let's dig into that a little bit, because it's at the forefront of every deal I'm assuming you guys are working on. It's in front of development. It's in front of everything that evolves around what we're doing. So how are you, I assume there's an educational process that's had to go on, probably still ongoing, but let's talk about the impacts, how you're dealing with it, who's behind the curve still, who's catching up in terms of understanding that, because it affects everybody up and down the food chain of it. Sam, let's start with you.
I mean, with increased construction costs, the one solution to that is increased rents, and we're in a supply-constrained market. And what I've seen and what I've learned is these tenants can pay more rent than I think any of us thought they could. We have pushed significantly, and as in the brokerage transaction business, that's a hard place to be. You want to transact, get deals done, move on to the next deal. But when the market is in the position it's in, it's important to really push the boundary of rental rates. And to Sarah's point earlier, rental bumps 4% is the new 3% from an asking standpoint, and you're certainly settling closer to that these days. And we're pushing rents on what used to be the average deal size in Austin of 25 to 40,000 feet. Those tenants don't have any options, and we're pushing 12 net in some cases. So rental rates are how you're solving the construction issue right now.
You should have to be thoughtful about it. I mean, things are changing on a weekly basis between sprinkler pipe, rebar, roofing materials, steel. I mean, it started as steel, and then it turned into roofing, and then there's 87 things that are all, carved out of your GMP contract. GMP contracts kind of aren't GMP contracts anymore, but that's okay. And at the same time, making sure that you're staying in tune with market demand. Fortunately, market demand across the board has continued to be very robust, but inevitably you're going to see people table some projects because of what costs are doing. I think at the same time, there's been a somewhat of a disconnect. So pricing's been high, but schedule of when you can actually get the materials has been very extended. Now, with likely some things moving around with the group we talked about earlier, potentially some materials ease up from a timing and delivery standpoint, but there's still going to be a lot. They're still going to cost a lot of money. So staying on top of it, being thoughtful about that, not just bidding something 60 days ago and expecting the price to be the same, will set you up for future success.
Yeah, I'll add to that. It's tough, and everyone in this room's probably dealt with it on the industrial front, but when you're trying to get a building out of the ground and you're having to increase your underwriting every month because of your costs going up and having to prove that up, it's a tough pill to swallow. But I mean, luckily we've seen that rental growth. We're continuing to see it. We don't think that's going to slow down. But what's most important is just timing. And so we've hit that so many times over the past really 6 months, it feels like, where if you're building a building, you don't have your spec office in, you're not getting your levelers ordered 8 months out from completion, you're going to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to actually getting your building full. And so I think timing and those delays on getting that product, those materials to build out your spec work, that's what's most important to these tenants today.
The other thing I would add is that, we've all seen where sales pricing has gone, and I'll let Madison talk about that more, but, whatever you're paying for your construction materials and however you're choosing to capitalize or amortize that additional cost into the rate, you're getting paid back for when you sell, and, that wasn't the case, particularly I think about some of our shallow bay rear load product. That ceiling is totally gone, and so now when a deal shows up and it prices out at $15, $20, $25 a foot for TI, that doesn't scare folks as long as the credit's there, because we know that when on an exit, you're really seeing the value there. You're not seeing an adjustment based on how high that TI is.
Well, and rents are growing too.
Sorry?
Rents are growing significantly.
Right. So the rent goes up, but you're never going to see never. You're not seeing a correction right now when you exit for a really expensive TI deal, and so I think that makes folks a lot more eager to go ahead and move forward with it. The one thing I would add, and we've seen this from a couple different groups, is that, if someone is coming in and they're saying, hey, we want $8 for the scope of work and that's what it costs, great. They are also adding, and we are strongly considering, okay, well, they also want an extra $2 amortized. They're not even saying what it's for, aside from just construction costs, but what they're doing, and when the price is right and the credit is right, we're agreeing, is let's go ahead and build in that extra couple of dollars that we know ultimately when this reprices and finally signs and the scope moves or whatever it is, let's just have that mechanism built in now on the LOI side, so that we're not having the fight in 60 days when everyone has more sticker shock because something got more expensive.
When we think about the disconnect between tenants' expectations, landlords' expectations, let's talk about how you all are merging that gap, and how sensitive is that conversation, and what are you doing to ultimately get to the end game where we all know we have to get to. But Sarah, elaborate on that a little bit and the finesse that has to go on in that.
I just got yelled at yesterday, so this is great. So, I would say, and I think this is probably true, at least in Dallas, 18 months ago, even 12 months ago, there was a ton of sticker shock, especially with renewal proposals, but even new deals. Almost anything we sent out was almost met with offense, either from the tenant or the broker or both. And to some degree, man, yeah, we just raised your rate 50%. I get it. That's a shocking increase. A lot of that shock has come and gone, especially seasoned tenants and seasoned brokers. They understand where the market has gone. And so, from that piece, I think it's gotten easier. I think speed to market is so essential for so many tenants. Thinking about what has changed is that 500,000 feet all of a sudden needs occupancy in 60 days. That was not the case 12 months ago. So, thing one is, okay, we can't give you a rate that you're happy with, but can we get you what you need in the timing that you need it? And which, with a lot of groups, that's actually the most essential thing. The other piece, look, this comes down to reputation and building relationships and understanding that, there's a lot of landlords in this room. I don't think all of them wake up every morning and like twist their mustache to see how mean they can be. We're all trying to do market deals. And so, that's about building relationships and making sure there's an open transparency with costs and that ultimately, everyone is kind of upfront with what their end goal is. Now, if someone could tell the guy yesterday that'd be great. But, we have those conversations and I think they've gotten better actually in the last, 6 or 12 months. The expectations have changed for sure.
Rachel said it well on the office panel, and it's very true on the industrial side, which is the quickest way to get people to understand the realities when they miss out on a couple spaces that they wanted, and that's certainly been happening on the industrial side. And so in a lot of these markets, you don't have 4 or 5 options to evaluate, and ultimately, rent is 4 to 5% of the capital stack of running a distribution. So the tenants can certainly pay more in rent. And a lot of the tenant rep focus has been to identifying the spaces and securing the facility and not being as ticky-tack as it relates to bumps, TI, or term because options are dwindling quickly.
And that percentage hasn't shifted at all as all costs have increased. So,
All right, let's pivot for a second. Let's talk about ground-up construction and advice you are advising your developers, your clients, as it relates to building design, delivery expectations, et cetera. Sam, I want to start with you, just given the differences in Central Texas that you guys are seeing and what you guys would deliver from a shell standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, the typical Austin building, over the past 5-10 years has been cold dark shell, dock bumpers, and that's it. You got to pull electrical, you got to do everything. So given supply chain, everything we've talked about, we're taking a page out of Dallas and Houston's book for Central Texas, and just, you need to be ready for tenants. And we're seeing a lot of tenants that want space quicker. It's hard to permit in Central Texas and all the municipalities that we deal in, and so the quicker you can get space, the better your chances are. And we don't have the dock package, tenant demand that I think the other bigger markets do, but just dipping our toe in that because of the lag time. Office space, we need a little bit more office space. We need a little bit more parking. Clear heights are going up, but they don't need to be as big because the buildings aren't as big. So just having your building ready to go and following the cues from the other markets.
yeah, definitely from an amenities standpoint, more trailer parking, more car parking, higher clear heights, expandability, more scale just in your land site. Tenants are looking for that just because everything is shifting so quickly with their technology, with their uses, et cetera. So flexibility is still really important, but I agree with Sam. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to speed. And so, we've seen even some requirements hit the market that are either, whether they're a build-to-suit or, a design build, let's call it, or just a really early on pre-lease, and they're drawing the line saying, we're only gonna put your building on a survey if you can prove to us that you already have your permit in hand for your spec work and you've already ordered your levelers and you can give us a well-defined delivery schedule. And and if you can't, then we're not even gonna look at your building. And so we haven't seen that happen ever before now.
All right, so all of this is, from a leasing standpoint, it all works. Costs are increasing, but rents are increasing. Demand's still there, so it still works. The volatility we're seeing is as we all know, and interest rates and what's happening there. Let's take a little turn here, and Madison, let's talk about what's happening in capital markets. What are you seeing? What are you kind of expecting here in the next couple months, whatever?
Coming at me with the interest rate question? Thought we were partners, bud. So, yes, interest rates are volatile right now. They're going up. Cap rates are being impacted. That being said, uncertainty leads to opportunity, in our opinion. A lot of the buyer pool that was super active 90 days ago is not as active today. A new wave of buyers have come into the market that are more focused on unlevered returns and more value-add opportunities. The 10-year credit lease deal with 2.5% bumps is no longer in vogue. People want vacancy, they want value-add, they want low WALT. Who knows how long that stays in favor? We think there's a big case to be made that a year from now that's going to change. But again, there's still so much opportunity out there, and there's so much capital chasing the industrial space. So yes, interest rates are going up. At the same time, rents are growing, and they're going to continue to grow. All the Texas markets, fundamentally from a supply and demand standpoint, are very healthy. And demand continues to be very, very robust. And I think that's the one thing people aren't talking about as much. It's demand. And the fact that deals in the market continue to grow, deals are getting bigger. Austin and San Antonio are taking off, and Houston finally, as I mentioned, I'll mention it again because I know many of you are rolling your eyes. Houston has rent growth and is going to continue to have rent growth. So yes, things are a little choppy, but that's okay because it allows others that understand the fundamentals and are well capitalized to take advantage of this situation.
Let's talk about trends, and let's start with you, Madison. Just trends of buyers. What kind of the trends you're seeing on that side, and then let's transition that to the other three here in terms of trends within your market and you know, whether tenant demand or tenant trends and you know, or something unique that you might be seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it briefly, but people that are buying assets want to be able to touch it somehow. They want to get to the rent roll. They want vacancy. They're being much more selective. I think part of this is posturing on the buyer side. I mean, buyers, it's been such a competitive environment for so long, and you know, the best and final rounds, just it's exhausting. So, you know, some of it could be posturing. Obviously, interest rates are impacting things, but if you've got vacancy, if the asset's well located, if there's a good story behind it, and there's low WALT, people are really pricing through a lot of the noise.
Sarah, trends?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think the big debate right now is what people do with lease term. So, you know, we've got, on one hand, we have a trend that ownership is taking that lead and saying perhaps we want to look at a 3-year deal or a 4-year deal, whereas before the tenant was begging for it and couldn't get it. Now what I'm actually seeing is a handful of tenants all saying we really want a 10-year deal or north of that. We want the TI, or we are putting a bunch of money into the deal, or whatever the case may be. They want 10 years. And we have the landlord saying, yeah, no thanks, how about 7? So I think that actually has been an interesting trend, and one certainly I'm watching. You know, I think everybody's kind of got a hot sports opinion about what the right strategy is there, but it's certainly something that's been changing.
Sam, in Central Texas and Austin, we're starting to hear the buzzword life sciences and different types of uses. Are you guys, it feels like Austin may be one of the first markets in Texas to see that or experience that. Are you seeing that, or what's going on?
We have seen it. We've done a life sciences deal recently. With
you also define for everybody else what that means?
Yeah. Lab, basically, yeah. So we did do a large life sciences deal in an infill, you know, what used to be the traditional Austin submarket, southeast submarket. You know, it's only a few miles from downtown. You know, and I'd say from a trend standpoint, real quick, too, what we've seen is just, you know, these buildings are getting further and further out from the city core, and I think that's true in all of our markets. You know, we used to cover a 15 or 20 mile north to south distance. Now that distance is 60 miles from Georgetown to San Marcos, and it's even further when you loop in San Antonio as well. And so, you know, and we can talk about it, it's a little bit of a tangent, but just the supply is spread out over such a far area. And then you look back to this life sciences infill product, and it's infill now, but again, just 5 years ago, it was traditional. This was our bread and butter. So we're seeing the demand from those tenants to come in. They want to pay, you know, a higher rent, transform the building. It's got more parking. Maybe it's lower clear height. The bigger users are going farther out. And then from the manufacturing standpoint, which is tied to life sciences in Austin, you know, you just have this semiconductor, you know, electric car, tech, you know, fabric to our economy. And so I think we will see demand there. We are seeing demand there, and I think that's a to be determined positive thing for the market, at least for Austin and Central Texas.
All right, you mentioned things are going out. There's probably a lot of folks in the crowd that are developers and we're having conversations with as it relates to where can I find my next opportunity, where can I go next on as it relates to land. Let's talk about land. Sarah, where do you get land in North Dallas, North DFW?
you find something, you tear it down, or you spend $20 a foot. That's just the trend, and I think across really all of the major submarkets we've seen this. It started with a $20 purchase, and then everyone's topping each other. And I joke with somebody, I feel like we skipped like 12, 13, 14 bucks a foot. We were 8, and then we were 20. In terms of infill markets, really you're looking for the last possible site. Every site has hair. There's a long story behind whatever it is. I think the next thing, particularly thinking about some of the more central areas, is where does redevelopment start to make sense? We're not there in a lot of areas or in a lot of pockets because, of course, those same sites that you would be looking at are owned by warehouse owners who have been told that their building's worth $500 a foot now. But I do think that's probably, from an infill market, that's really, really what's next.
Matt, what about South?
It's fairly similar, actually, even though they're such different markets. When you look at an aerial in South Dallas or the east side or South Fort Worth, it looks like land kind of goes on forever. But when you start really peeling it back, zoning's an issue, utilities are an issue. Land pricing's obviously kind of completely gone through the roof. But it's hard to find ready-to-go developed sites. It's also jumping over large kind of areas of undeveloped areas of the market. So you're getting to the point where you're 35, 40 miles out, 50 miles out, people looking down in Ennis, Cleburne, areas of the market where you essentially would have to Google the name of that town before you went down there. And so that's where the conversation's going. And I think we're probably not too far from actually seeing development down in those markets. But I think today we need to see where some of this existing under construction goes.
What about Houston? Everybody wants to be northeast or the port. Where else can they go?
Yeah, I don't know what zoning is. We don't have that. The challenge with Houston has been a lot of where the development's moving, there are no utilities. And so it extends the delivery time frame. And I know Sam's probably laughing inside because it takes 15 years to build a building in Austin. But a lot of people are moving further out 290. The population center of Houston's at the intersection of 290 and 610 and continue to move further northwest. So obviously as you're a distributor, you want to be as close as you can to the rooftops. The port's very active, but a lot of development due to floodplain regulation changes is moving north of the channel over into Baytown. And the Port of Houston's continuing to just take off. Northwest Houston's obviously very popular. West Houston, while it looks like there's a lot of land, the majority of it's spoken for. There's about to be a big development wave out there. But again, no zoning's blessing and a curse. It's great because if you have the capital and a great idea, you can go execute on it. It's bad because everyone that owns land thinks it's going to be the next Four Seasons, even though it's in the middle of an industrial park. So it's tough to get those sellers motivated to sell. But there's still opportunities. You just have to get creative.
All right, we got just a couple minutes here. We're going to do a quick lightning round. One question for each of you, and we'll start with you, Madison. Houston, it's always been tied to oil, right? Everybody has said that Houston lives and dies by the oil market. Well, oil's been over $100 a barrel for quite a while and has been doing fine for quite a while. What's the correlation, and does it affect supply or the demand?
Limited correlation, to put a number behind this. We went back to 2011 and tracked every lease transaction we've done on the industrial side. 13% had some type of connection to oil, either a 3PL contract, engineering company, what have you. The industrial market was doing great when oil was negative 38.50. The office market wasn't. And it's doing equally well, if not better, when oil is at 115. And the reality is, a lot of the oil field service companies that ultimately take off when oil jumps really doesn't impact a lot of the institutional product. It really impacts the metal crane serve manufacturing, very user-specific buildings that the majority of people in this room don't have an appetite for owning or operating. So false, it does not really impact industrial.
Sam, 12 months ago versus today, how many more institutional people are calling you and wanting to get into Central Texas or have entered Central Texas?
It's too many to count is the short answer. And I would say, to elaborate on that and to go back on your land question, we haven't, Georgetown was not on the map, 18 months ago. And all of a sudden it is, and there's I think I tallied 6 million square feet or so under construction, or about to be under construction up there in the next 12 months. And so really, we've just seen this explosive separation in the geography of it. And so with that, we've seen, we're getting a lot of millennials in Austin. We're also getting a lot of new developers. And I think those new developers are understanding that it is very hard and slow to develop there. So it's a frustrating process for a lot of people.
All right, last question. This is for both Sarah and Matt, because I couldn't come up with a question that y'all both couldn't answer. So we got, call it plus or minus 70 million square feet that is under construction in DFW, obviously an all-time high. Overbuilding? No? How's it going to get leased?
Ask me in November. No, I think right now, so yeah, 70 million square feet. I think we're about 23, 25% pre-lease. That includes build-to-suits. Understand that a lot of that product just recently broke ground. It's not going to deliver until Q3 of 2023. So when you look at what's delivering this year, you're probably in that 45 to 50 million square feet. That's still a really big number, but we're also tracking, again, 60 million square feet of deals in the market. There's multiple large leases out across DFW today. And, I think if we're watching how this pre-leasing is we're expecting it to continue, I think we'll have a lot better answer in November. If that slows at all and we see any sort of pullback in that demand, then I think we got something to talk about.
I think you all need to call Matt in November just to see if his prediction came true. The only thing I would say or would add, as long as deals in the market stay at 60 million feet or north of that, I think we're in good shape.
60 million feet is bigger than Austin's entire market.
Thank you.
That's all we got. Thank y'all for listening, and give it up for our panel here. Thank you.
Is it on? Thank you, Preston and Steve. Also, wanted to thank our moderators and panelists for the event tonight. To our sponsors here in front and that we've seen, thank you so much for trusting us and partnering with us to put on such a great event. And to everyone in the room, our clients, our friends, stream people, thank you for taking time away from your family, from your day to join us at this event. We look forward to continuing conversation, having food and cocktails downstairs. So if you go out these doors downstairs to Scout, we look forward to seeing you down there in a couple of minutes. Thanks again for coming.